This is another few examples of using my metal lathe converted for ornamental turning. In this case, I've mounted a cheap 1-inch or 25.4 millimeter dowel from the hardware store in my chuck. This first example started with a slightly twisted line in corn lathe, and I applied one of the many rosette patterns to this to get this little pattern. It's kind of fun. It ends up being 24 engravings of this pattern around 1 inch to get a reasonable density. I initially started with 8, but it didn't look all that great. I have a 60-degree V-bit in my 800-watt spindle, and this is being used in what's called drill frame mode. This is at real cutting time, so it didn't take all that long, but I will speed it up since there's another 20 cuts to go. This particular example showed the fickle nature of wood. In one direction it cuts very cleanly, and in another direction there's a lot of fuzzies and a little bit of tear out. I think this was a 90-degree twist, in other words, a quarter of a turn around the wood. 360 degrees would be a full turn. Cut depth is about 1/10 of an inch, or 2.5 to 3 millimeters. There's nothing special about this pattern, it just looked like some fun. And cutting it on a 1-inch dowel shows the versatility of using something like a metal lathe for doing ornamental turning. This is back to actual cutting speed. The whole cut took about 8 minutes. To get rid of the fuzzies, I usually use a stiff plastic brush. It doesn't mess up the wood too much. If you do too much sanding, you will blunt the sharpness of the pattern. Since this is a hardware dowel, it isn't the greatest wood in the world. I'm not actually sure what it is, probably poplar. I turned the spindle speed up to 6,000 to 7,000 RPM just to try to get a little bit cleaner cuts on this one. So that's the end of that first pattern. This next one also started out as a straight line pattern with a little bit of twist to it, and I applied a sine rosette to it. Image's program contains many rosette patterns that can be changed in all kinds of ways very easily. The frequency, the twist, the height or amplitude of each of the waves, the spacing, almost anything you can imagine. I sped this up because there's another 20 cuts to go. This one cut slightly cleaner than the other one, probably because it was at a little bit shallower angle. This is more along the line of guilloche patterns that you might see. If I used a diamond drag bit on brass, and a much closer spacing of course, you could get quite a nice pattern out of this. This one took a similar length of time to cut to the last pattern, about 8 minutes. This 60-degree V-bit I'm using here cuts deeply enough to demonstrate enough of the pattern, and yet not as deeply, of course, as a 30-degree bit. I haven't found those to be particularly useful. 60-degree, 90, and 120 degrees seem to be commonly used angles on the end. This is a V-bit, but this is not V carving. That's an entirely different thing, and I'll be doing some videos on this channel about that later. So that's that little pattern. The fuzzy scrubbed off quite nicely with a plastic brush. The last one is a little more straightforward, as you'll see. Not sure why the video jerked there a little bit. It's smooth in regular playback. Maybe my computer is getting tired. So this is a series of straight lines, obviously. There will be 16 going around the circumference. This has a 90-degree twist to it, but otherwise is unremarkable. But even with just that, you can make a nice pattern, as you'll see. I could have easily done 24 lines around this 1-inch dowel, but for the pattern, as you'll see, that will muddy it up. So I'll speed this up. This pattern didn't take as long as the other two because not quite so many lines, of course. So in corn lathe, by copying and pasting these cut points and changing the twist from 90 degrees to negative 90 degrees, you can get this crosshatch pattern. Looks a little bit like knurling you might get on a metal lathe tool. The fuzzies on this pattern cleaned up very nicely with a plastic brush. Cut depth once again is 1/10 of an inch or 2.5 millimeters. 60-degree V-bit, 4,000 RPM. And the cutter is being used as a drill frame. This pattern is nearly complete. I hope you enjoyed this presentation of simple spindle patterns you can put on a dowel as small as an inch. I'm sure I could do this on a 3/4 inch dowel. And goodbye for now.